Please take your seats, everybody. Welcome, everybody, here in our audience and also in our online audience at home. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our event this evening. We're very excited to have you. Welcome especially to the Lieutenant Governor and her party, and members of the Royal Canadian Legion who are here as well. First, I'm going to ask everybody to turn off your phones. This is why I took my phone with me, because I often forget to turn mine off, so it's nice to have that reminder. But washrooms are over here for anybody who needs a washroom, and our fire exits, I'm assuming, are that way and that way. So those are just some housekeeping items this evening. So hello also to our friends of the deaf community. We are live streaming this event this evening, and we are providing ASL interpretation for our friends in the deaf community. So I'm Karen Carroll. I'm the president of St. John's Storytelling, and we are so happy to welcome everybody to this evening of remembrance as we launch our podcast, sharing World War I stories of Newfoundland and Labrador in the voices of those who have preserved them down through all these long years. So it's been a very special project that we set out on. I first have to offer apologies to the CLB Regimental Band, because in our initial invitation to this event, we called you by the wrong name, but we do thank you for understanding and being gracious about that. But we're very happy to have you here this evening as well, and welcome. Thank you for contributing to our evening. To start off the program this evening, we're going to have the CLB Regimental Band play The Banks of Newfoundland, also known as Up the Pond, which is what kind of the more commonly known name, I suppose, is. So it's a very well-known piece of music here, and you yourselves have probably heard it many times. What you may not know about this piece of music, and what I did not know about this piece of music, was it was the regimental march music for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. And so it would have been played as they marched down to the wharf to prepare to disembark to go across to Europe in 1914. And also, it was the music played as the survivors of Beaumont Hamel left the field of battle. So we will listen to that music now, probably in a different light than probably we've ever listened to it before. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Always makes me think of the boats at the regatta, but, you know, should make us think of different things tonight. I would like to now welcome my friend Mary Gabriel Cadigan to come up and offer us a land acknowledgement for our gathering this evening.
Kiwe, hello. With respect, we acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been erased forever. We acknowledge the island of Udahumguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, the Mi'kmaq. We acknowledge Labrador as the traditional ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nanatukkavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land, to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. We open our hearts and minds to the past, We commit ourselves to working in the spirit of truth and reconciliation to make it a better future for us all. We Ellen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. At St. John's Storytelling, we always like to reflect on the Indigenous peoples of this place, who, and really their way of telling stories and of passing down traditions and their history was oral storytelling, which is what we're all about at St. John's Storytelling. Now I'm going to introduce our hosts for this evening, Randy Crane and Gary Green. Randy is an actor, storyteller, writer, a singer who grew up in Fairyland, and he tells me he grew up between Ron Hines and John Curran. You can't always believe that crowd from the Southern Shore, but that's what he tells me every time he talks about it. He's a devoted son of the Southern Shore, that's for sure, and he is a member of the board of St. John's Storytelling for the past 2 years, and he has been a member of the steering committee of this project. And he has been a very devoted leader in this project. He's been a story gatherer, and he has recorded a story for the series. And he has been keeping us on budget, as he is our treasurer. And really, Randy has been instrumental in bringing us through this work these past few months. Gary Green is a walking encyclopedia of Newfoundland and Labrador folklore, a master storyteller, a published author, a musician, and a founding member of St. John's Storytelling. He's a long-standing pillar of the arts community here in Newfoundland and Labrador. He was born in St. John's, but he somehow seems to know something about everywhere in Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know how that works, but that's just the way he is. And I always call him the man of 1,000 stories, and he probably has more. Gary's sage advice and steady grasp of the history of World War I and how it affected Newfoundland and Labrador has been essential in guiding us through this project. And he is also a steering committee member and one of our story collectors on the project. So these two guys, along with the wonderful Susan O'Cumby, who is our fabulous project coordinator, we have been key parts of this project, and together we have, worked along with other people who will be mentioned later on in the program to be able to make this work available to share with the world this evening. We're so proud to be able to launch this podcast. So now I'm going to bring up Gary Green, and he's going to bring us into the next part of the program. Gary.
Thanks very much. Are you bookable for obituaries and things like that, right? There we go. So welcome, everybody, and welcome to the people who are joining us by live stream this evening. And yeah, as Karen said, somehow or other, this project seemed like it was, I don't know, it just developed by a bunch of people sitting around thinking about what could happen when the government offered us some money, basically. And the Year of the Arts came, and they were offering special projects. And our very esteemed leader, Karen here, said, well, boys, if we're going after it, it better be something that they can't say no to. And so that was it. And we thought around, and people appointed Randy and Karen and myself to try and come up with an idea to bring back to the board. And that's what we set out to do, talking to different people and so on. And we talked about the return of the unknown soldier. We talked about the World War I memorial being revamped as it was. And so I just happen to know a chap who unfortunately isn't able to be with us tonight, a guy by the name of Rob Shea. And Rob just so happened to be going down the hall as I was in another meeting at MUN and poked his head in the door, and I said, are you going to the office? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I'll be down in about an hour. So down I went, and I said, Rob, there's an idea we're kicking around. It took him about 2 minutes to get on board and said, I want to be a part of that. And I know this one, I know that one, I can talk to this, I can do this. And, we had a few online meetings, and the next thing you know, everybody is talking to the people that they knew who talked to other people, and bang, there it was. And Karen led the charge, wrote a wonderful grant proposal, and in it went. And a month or two later, we get the call that says, terrific program, let's go do something with this. And away to go. And then by this point in time, the Perlin Family Foundation had gotten on board, and they were saying, yeah, we want to see this happen. And we're dealing with the grandchildren now of the people who were involved. And another generation in the family stories would be lost. And so people thought, it's worth capturing the family stories now. And that's what we did. And unfortunately, as we were in early days of this, just the early couple of weeks of getting things going, unfortunately, Rob passed away suddenly and left a big hole in our organization, for sure. And we had to come back and regroup and so on. We picked up another person to help us out through the Memorial Partnership, Jan Bewley, who couldn't be with us tonight. She's teaching graduate students tonight, so she's not able to be here. But Jan has just done a tremendous job as well. So that's sort of what got us where we are. We've been excited by the reception we received all the way from down in the Burin Peninsula all the way to Nain. People have been coming forward with stories, and just great. One of the people that we consulted with rather early in the process, well, and I should mention that in this too, we came across young Susan Oak, and she was just the ball of fire that wanted to get going as soon as she got the position, and has just been an incredible generator of energy and positive experience for everybody through all of this. So thanks very much, Susan. But one of the people that came, absolutely. But one of the people who came to our first face-to-face meeting with all the group members together was Gary Brown. And, he is one of, if not the, preeminent scholars on World War I and the regiment and the police force in the province. He's written 3 books on World War I that I'm aware of, and another one, at least one, on the constabulary. And so is just a treasure trove. And he came and sort of said, hey guys, here's some things to think about, and helped us get on the right directions with it all. And so he sent me a printout thing. I think I've covered most of it, except for the fact that he's married to a very wonderful woman, Paula, and they have 2 incredibly beautiful grandchildren, he tells me. And so what else can you say about a man like that? So I'm going to ask Gary Brown if he'd come forward and say a few words to us, please.
Excuse me for a second. Wayne Miller, that means we're here for an hour more? No, only joking. Thank you very much. President Karen, Your Honor. Gerald Budden, President of the Royal Canadian Legion Newfoundland and Labrador Command. Veterans, special guests, members of the St. John's Storytelling Committee, ladies and gentlemen, both those present and those watching by live stream. And it's always so good to hear and see the renowned members of our band, the CLB Armory Band. Always a pleasure. So good to see you. Thank you. Firstly, I want to thank the St. John's Storytelling Group for inviting me to the official launch as their keynote speaker on Remembrance project that they are doing, and I give them so much credit. It's fantastic. And he also mentioned Gary did, a very close friend of mine and whom I lost, and pretty emotional about it. I will forever remember the excitement in the voice of my very close and now deceased friend, Dr. Robert Shea, former Memorial Vice President and hard-working member of the National Memorial Refurbishing Committee and the Repatriation Steering Committee. Rob was telling me about talking to the St. John's Storytelling Group about establishing a project, and he hoped that the storytellers could tell the untold stories of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who have served with distinction by sea, by land, and in the air. Rob, they answered your call. So tonight I will start by telling you a personal story of remembrance. My story begins on May 25th, 2024 at approximately 6 p.m. at the Torbay commercial side of the St. John's International Airport. I was at the airport in my then capacity as official spokesperson for the Royal Canadian Legion Newfoundland and Labrador, and as a proud 6-year member of the Newfoundland National Memorial Refurbishment Committee and the Steering Committee. 6 years. My good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Padre Sean Sampson, Canadian Armed Forces Chaplain in the Director's or General's Office, invited me to come over to the tarmac for the arrival of the aircraft carrying the repatriated remains of a World War I Newfoundland unknown hero who was coming back from the battlefields of northern France. The mood of the official welcoming party was one of excitement, but one could easily sense the collective sense of sadness at this extremely moving and unique historic occasion. The weather at the time of the arrival had been overcast and dull, but suddenly, as if through divine intervention, the clouds separated and the sun came out. And I want to share with you a powerful radio message which was sent to Premier Dr. Andrew Furey and the other passengers who were on the plane accompanying the remains of our hero back home. And I quote, "Dear passengers of Can Force 4147, I am Lieutenant Colonel Maxime Renault, Commanding Officer of 425 Tactical Fighter Squadron based out of Bagotville, Quebec. I am on your left wing, flying a CF-18 Hornet. On your right wing is my wingman, Captain Jake Chu, also of 425 Squadron. It is our honor and privilege to be part of this extremely important mission today. As you enter the Canadian sovereign airspace and the airspace above Newfoundland and Labrador, we are here to stand on guard for the remains of a true hero that gave his life more than a century ago fighting tyranny in Europe. We will ensure your aircraft is provided safe passage until its arrival at St. John's International Airport. Honorable Andrew Furey, Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, thank you for being the designated next of kin accompanying our hero back home." Then he ended his quote by saying, or his message, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God. We stand on guard for thee," unquote. Wow, that should go down in history and always be a part of the archives, telling us what they were guarding and bringing home to us back home. And during my research, I knew right away, Colonel Renault, he did his research. Because for those who aren't familiar, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God" comes from the Newfoundland coat of arms of 1637. Boy, we're old, aren't we? And we're proud of it. And of course, "We stand on guard" comes from our iconic national anthem, O Canada. On the ground, no one spoke as the plane carried the repatriated remains into its final approach and landed. Those present were noticeably moved. Tears were welled up in their eyes, and sadness. Padre Sampson invited me to join him at the side of the hearse along with Inspector Alex Brennan of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, who was a very proud former commanding officer of the 1st Battalion Royal Newfoundland Regiment, plus Lieutenant Commander Rodney Parcher and several other members of the Canadian Armed Forces. As I was moving towards the hearse, I noticed Premier Furey and his family disembarking from the plane. Premier Fury made his way to me and said, "Gary, we missed you in France," and smiled, and he gave me a hug. Premier Fury then advised me that he and his family would be forever affected by what occurred in relation to bringing home our hero, and by the lifetime honor he received has been appointed the designated next of kin. And I'm not speaking politically when I say this to you. Any of you, those who know me, will understand that. But he really felt it. It was obvious from the Premier's voice and comments that his family was deeply moved by the repatriation ceremonies that occurred in France earlier that day, and as their role as the unknown soldiers designated next of kin. Following an extremely solemn and emotional transfer, the repatriated remains and the hearse under police escort made its way from the airport, passing the World War I regimental training grounds at Pleasantville. It was important when Frank Sullivan came up with that idea and we brought the unknown soldier home. We went on that journey through St. John's. We wanted him to go to certain places. And I guess as a historian, I was nudging Frank and saying, this place, that place, that place. So they passed the regimental training camp. They passed the Newfoundland National War Memorial on Water Street, of course, which is 100 yards from the embarkation point where so many members of the regiment, the Naval Reserve, the Mercantile Marine, the Air Services, the Nursing Services, and others departed from St. John's for World War I. We brought his remains past that. Also, the St. John's Harbour was the same location where so many of the physically and emotionally scarred servicemen came back home after World War I, never to be the same. The hearse also passed by the revered Warrant Officers and Sergeants Memorial on Queen's Road, and then made its way past this very iconic CLB Armory, which was the World War I recruiting center for the Newfoundland Regiment. So, ladies and gentlemen, you sit on sacred ground. And it was also the home of many of the World War I CLB members who had become soldiers of the famous Blue Puttees. The hearse then continued along through the RNC headquarters to the rooms. Ladies and gentlemen, hundreds of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians had come out on May 25th to pay their respects to the fallen hero as the hearse made its way through the historic streets of St. John's, which, of course, would have been familiar to what I say, the boy whose remains were in that hearse. At this time, I feel it's very important for me to clearly state to you that the unknown soldier's remains represents all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who have served over the many years, especially those who paid the supreme sacrifice in the Navy, the Army, the Air Services, the Mercantile Marine, the Forestry Units, the Volunteer Aid Detachment, and those in the nursing services and respective support groups at home and abroad. Now I will fast move forward from the arrival of the repatriated remains to the west end of Harbour Drive on a rainy Memorial Day on July 1st. It was there I would be given the extreme privilege of being one of the 6 honorary pallbearers who, along with 6 Royal Newfoundland Regiment official pallbearers, would escort the remains of our World War I hero up Water Street to his final resting place on the top plateau of our iconic Newfoundland National War Memorial. The hearse would be immediately followed by Premier Fury, his wife and children, who again proudly acted as next of kin. All parade contingents marched east on Water Street to the National War Memorial. I will never forget the raw emotions that I experienced as I marched along immediately next to the hearse between the distinguished Legionnaires Frank Sullivan and Berkeley Lawrence, who both had long-term, very distinguished careers in the Canadian Armed Forces. Berkeley was the chair of the Royal Canadian Legion Newfoundland and Labrador's Command National War Memorial Refurbishment, and Frank was a proponent of the Unknown Soldier Repatriation Project. 2 extremely proud Newfoundland veterans. And Frank is here this evening. Frank, you stand up, please. Berkeley couldn't attend because he's out in Carbonear with his Legion, and I'm very proud and happy to say to you, as of, I think, end of August, Jerry, was it, or Berkeley is now the Dominion President of all the Royal Canadian Legion in Canada. So we're very proud. So Frank and Berkeley and I have a special friendship that we forged over the last 6 years. And I'm so proud of both of them. There were other honorary pallbearers too. David Mercer. David is here tonight, a well-known CLB Army man back there in his attire. And he was there that day representing the CLB because they lost so many of their members. And David, just to let you know for history's sake, if you see the tie I'm wearing, it's the blue and gold of the St. Bonaventure's college students who marched to this armory when war broke out from St. Bon's, and they were the next highest amount next to the CLB Armory, so it's important to remember. And also Heather Walsh Hudson from Placentia, she represented the families of the fallen. Her great uncle died at Beaumont Hamel, no known grave. And finally, the nurse Patricia Hearn from Bay Bulls represented the nursing service. I was so proud to be part of that group. As I said, the Premier and his family walked directly behind the hearse, while Lieutenant Colonel Sean Sampson marched in front of the hearse as the officiating Canadian Armed Forces chaplain. I will forever remember the solemn, haunting beat of the muffled bass drum as we marched in slow military cadence east down Water Street. And anyone who was there and that prayed, and it is so mournful, and I know all our musicians in the CLB band know it, when that muffled drum was beating, it was like your heart was beating. And every time you put your left foot down, it would beat. My God, I'll feel it for the rest of my life. But what an honor, what an eerie feeling as we brought this hero home. Hundreds of spectators braved the rain to honor their unknown hero and silently pay their respects that day. Our renowned Royal Newfoundland Regiment band periodically played mournful but beautiful military slow marches as the burial component made its way up Water Street to the War Memorial. As the parade made its way down Water Street, I noticed out of the corner of my eye, and I was allowed to cheat a little bit, Wayne, don't forgive me for that, I noticed a young man taking pictures. As I got to warm, he's a pretty big boy, he's about 6'3", and as I got near him, to my proud surprise, it was our oldest son, Christopher. And it was at that time the flood of emotions overtook me, and tears ran down my face, and I still get emotional about it. In seeing Christopher, I could not help but compare our son's life to the life of that unknown hero that I was marching next to, whose remains would be so proudly escorted to their final place of rest at home. The unknown hero would have had, like our son, aspirations of love, being loved, happiness, fun, and probably having children. But a cruel war in a far-off land would brutally take his young life, never permitting him to grow old in his beloved North Atlantic home, Newfoundland and Labrador, where he would have been surrounded by family, by loved ones, and by friends. I will end this portion of my personal story as the parade reaches the National War Memorial. But for days following the request by the storytellers group to be their speaker tonight, I pondered deeply on how my remembrance presentation would appropriately meet the goals of their launch tonight. And my thoughts, how could I address the fluid subject and complex subject of remembrance? As I was browsing through my research binders, I came across what I sincerely believe to be one of the most outstanding community-based World War I stories. It is the exceptional story of the young Beatrix Potter Elementary School from Wandsworth Borough in London, England. The Beatrix Potter School is located directly across the street from World War I Wandsworth Military Hospital in the Earlsfield Cemetery. Many of the soldiers buried there in the cemetery would have spent their last days at Wandsworth Hospital dying from wounds in World War I. During the early days of the war, Wandsworth Hospital was designated as one of the main European hospitals for the treatment of soldiers from the British Empire, which, of course, included our boys from Newfoundland and Labrador. Literally hundreds of World War I Newfoundland soldiers had been treated at Wandsworth Hospital, and some of them would take their last breath there. 18 Newfoundlanders, of whom 17 were members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and one nursing assistant from the Voluntary Aid Detachment, Bertha Bartlett, are buried in the Newfoundland Cemetery plot opposite the Beatrix Potter School. On a November's day in 2003, following Armistice Day in England, a number of young students from the Beatrix Potter Elementary School, in company with their senior teacher, Steph Neal, went across to the cemetery on a conker hunt. Now, a lot of us don't know, I didn't know what a conker was. It's a chestnut. So they were hunting for chestnuts, as we used to do as kids at St. Bon's. The children noticed there were poppies by all the military headstones, except for a particular plot containing 18 graves. They asked their teacher, why was this the case? That there were nothing on these graves, but yet there was poppies on all the other military graves in a fairly big cemetery. They also asked, could they place the poppies on the 18 graves? The teacher suggested that students find out all they could about the graveyard and the people who were buried there. Since 2003, the children of Beatrix Potter Elementary School have adopted 18 Newfoundlanders buried at the Wandsworth Cemetery, who they proudly call our Newfoundlanders. Every year since 2003, the students have tended to the Wandsworth Newfoundland Cemetery plot, and annually they lay poppies on a small Newfoundland and Labrador flag there, especially during the commemoration days. The Beatrix Potter students have created a memorial wall in one of the corridors of their school. And as I look out and I see Captain Gatehouse here, Ken saw it personally, and he was with the children over there along with Lieutenant Colonel Strong from the regiment, and they can tell you what a job they've done. They've adopted our boys and Bertha Bartlett. In late June of 2018, Headmaster Steve Neal and a group of Potter students, parents and teachers journeyed all the way to St. John's on their own means in order to meet the descendants of their Newfoundlanders. And they wanted to visit the birthplace and homes of their adopted heroes. The students were truly astounded how the people of Newfoundland and Labrador treated them as heroes and celebrities during their visit. The Royal Newfoundland Regiment Association acted as hosts for the visiting Potter delegation. I had the personal pleasure of having lunch and meeting with the students and other members of the Potter delegation. I also had the privilege of presenting each student with one of my autographed books, Fallen Boy Soldiers of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, World War I, because those soldiers who died with our regiment weren't much older than the Beatrix Potter kids, believe it or not. On Memorial Day, July 1st, 2018, the Potter delegation marched in the memorial parade with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment and its association members. Then the students proudly laid a wreath on the Newfoundland National War Memorial. But ladies and gentlemen, to try and give you a better sense of remembrance tonight, and this is what I wanted to do, I want to use the words of these kids, these young, outstanding British students. To try and understand it better, I will take the comments by the Beatrix Potter kids from the Ted Blades' outstanding 2015 CBC Remembrance documentary. And I quote this, and think what I'm quoting now comes from elementary children who adopted our boys. Here's what they say. It is important to know their names. They weren't just random people who went to war. They gave their lives to give us our freedom. What they did was really brave and really important to our history. Hopefully, our efforts will make the people back in Newfoundland really happy and really proud. These are elementary school children. They're talking about us. They said they want to be so proud of them because they went out there and they fought and they lost their lives, fighting for Britain and Serbia and other countries. More quotes from them. They helped us, and I think that's why we can't forget them, because they didn't just fight for their country, they fought for others too. It is important to know their names, they said, so that we can respect them fully and remember that they had their own lives and not just fighting in war. These were elementary kids, unbelievable. To know their names, otherwise they will be forgotten. The Newfoundland soldiers helped Britain win the war. Some of the parents didn't get close to see their soldiers' graves. This is what they're saying. I think this is upsetting, and I am so sad they died so young. A young kid from London saying about our boys and Bertha Bartlett. A Potter student said to the people of Newfoundland, and I quote, I just want to say thank you very much for helping us in the war, and just want to say that their graves are well looked after. even if you are wondering. And the headmaster, Steph Neal, nicely sums it all up, and I quote, "The connection that has been made between the students of Beatrix Potter School and the Newfoundlanders across the road is as much about the future as it is about the past. The children need to know that war has consequences, and that is vital," unquote. Wow. The truly insightful, honest, and powerful words of the wisdom from the remarkable school children in Britain, in my humble opinion, more than adequately sums up why we should remember, and a heck of a lot better than I could possibly do. I strongly feel that every Newfoundlander and Labradorian elementary child should view the Ted Blades CBC documentary on the Beatrix Potter students. I also firmly believe that the documentary with related generated discussion should be compulsory in our school provincial curriculum. I truly believe that. Your Honor, if I may be so bold, I might make a sincere suggestion or lay a seed that someday soon, maybe a certain lieutenant governor or a certain premier would visit the Beatrix Potter School, meet these children.
November 22nd, I am going to visit the Beatrix Potter School as part of the
Wow. And Your Honor can tell you that wasn't part of it. I wasn't speaking to her. Wow, am I ever pleased. And you're going, Captain Gatehouse and Colonel Strong can tell you, you're going to get some honor and some welcome. God bless you for doing it. I'm so proud, so I can take that off my list. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight as you leave this historic CLB Armory and you walk through the original door arch out here, I want you to reflect and remember that thousands of our boys who fought in World War I and many who never returned walked through that same arch numerous times, shipping off to war. The same place. Reflect for a second as you march or walk by it. I sincerely thank you for your attention and leave you with this saying, as you well know. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Gary. Absolutely. The kind of story that you started telling is the kind of thing we were trying to collect. You know, the history books say this happened at such a time and so on, but to hear the personal experience that somebody had during a very significant historic event is incredible, and that's what we were trying to get here. And the other thing we were trying to do was we were trying to preserve this for the children. One of the things that's always been a part of this project is working with the Department of Education to make all of what we collect available to the students. It's our understanding that there is a new history program coming into the school system, and we want to make sure that this resource, that people get to understand about the sacrifice and so on that these people made 100 years ago, and just phenomenal, and how it has changed who we are today, and so very much a part of our identity. So thank you very much for that. Terrific to hear your story. And now we're going to have a World War I selection from the band, and then Randy is going to come forward with the next bit. The band.
Good evening. Once we acquired and secured the funding for this project, thanks in no small part to Karen Carroll learning grant writing skills, tremendous grant writing skills overnight, we decided to have an initial meeting to see where we would go with this project now that we had our hands around it. And we asked Gary Brown to come in. Everybody recognized the encyclopedic knowledge of World War I, and we asked him to come in to our meeting. And somebody asked him, what do you think we should do? And he spoke for about 20 minutes, talking about the books and the documentaries and the life, people with unbelievable collections of stories and likes. And after about 15 minutes, we all realized that we were in over our heads with this. And Gary told us at that time that the hardest thing that we were going to have to do with this project was narrow it down to something that we could get our hands around and be able to handle. Because we are a storytelling group, we settled on taking stories from the people who their families had served in the war or were affected by World War I. And we initially thought that the best way to do this was the traditional way that we've been doing our stories for years now, a story circle. We would invite people in to tell their stories. As a host, we would record those stories, set up some audio recording, and we would have ourselves a whole bunch of stories. But that didn't quite work out. We had some success in some areas, some less in other areas. People weren't comfortable with coming in and telling a story in the manner that we could record it and put it into our podcast. So we decided that we would send people out to collect these stories into people's homes. And so that's where the almost 100 stories that we collected came from. And as a storyteller, I couldn't believe the emotion that people, when they were telling me a story in their home about something that happened 100+ years ago to somebody that they didn't know, but you could feel the emotion coming off that person, and it was unbelievable. So that's how we ended up collecting, like I said, 100+, and then Rebecca Nolan took those, and you'll see later on tonight put them together very, very well. So that's how we collected the stories that you will eventually hear in our podcast. Now, one of the storytellers that I took a story from was Larry Brazel. Now, Larry is a singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and he's been entertaining people on the southern shore and in the St. John's area for years. And Larry and I I've been lucky enough to work with Larry on a number of projects. The latest one is our Paddy Iron Chronicles story, and we've had some great success and some good audience reviews from that, and Larry is certainly responsible for most of that. What Larry doesn't put on his bio and his resume is that he's a storyteller. But if you listen to the lyrics of the songs that Larry Brazel writes, there will be no doubt that I can introduce storyteller Larry Brazel.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, well, I'm from Renews. I go up there. There's a monument in the cemetery in Renews with the names of 2 young men on it. Both those men went away in the First War and never came back, and their bodies were never found. They are commemorated on the plaque at Beaumont Hamel. One of those young men was Billy Harding. Billy was a fisherman from Renews who decided he was going to go to war. He was he was the son of William Harding, and the reason why I'm saying this because I'm going to ask a question later on. His father was Christopher Harding, and his mother was Mary Guerin Harding. Both of them were from Renews. Now, Billy was the only son. He was the last of his line. We've been trying to trace some of his descendants. We can't find anybody. So if anybody thinks they got relations to Guerins in Renews or Hardings, I'd love to speak to you afterwards. But anyway, Billy was, like I said, Billy was 29, I think, when he was killed. And back in 2016, for the 100th anniversary, I decided that because there's nobody around Belanton, that I would like to, as a tribute to him, write a song. So I wrote the song, and I call it The Ballad of Billy Harding. And with Randy's help, Randy's going to get Randy to introduce it. We do a little poem before this. You might have heard it before.
Under the sunny skies of France, he yielded up his life. The fisher lad from Newfoundland, unused to war and strife. And ere his dying eyes were closed, he saw, as in a dream, the tall grey cliffs, the haven where the home lights softly gleam. He saw his boat at anchor lie, he saw his comrades true. He heard again the songs he loved, the songs his childhood knew. Across the din of war he heard a wave break on the strand, and his heart went back in that final hour to far-off Newfoundland.
Young Billy Harding, a fisherman by trade, he fished the shores of Newfoundland in a dory he had made. And did he know where he was going when he went and joined the fray? When he put him on that ship for Suvla Bay. Now the record shows his number, Regimental 995, 6th Platoon D Company, when he left the harbor side. And he boarded the Stefano with his rifle and grenades. From a fisher to a soldier he was made. Young Billy Harding came from my hometown. He joined the Royal Regiment and in the Great War got shot down. Now he lies near Beaumont Hamel, never more to roam. Young Billy Harding never made it home. Young Billy Harding, for right and liberty, went off to be a soldier back in 1915. And was it duty or employment, or adventure far from home? Or was it pride that made him wear that uniform? And his name upon the monument stands tall on hallowed ground to perpetuate the hero back there in his hometown. With the words so carefully written, killed in action, carved in stone, Private William Harding never made it home. Private William Harding came from my hometown. He joined a Royal Regiment and in the Great War got shot down. Now he lies near Beaumont Hamel, never more to roam. Private William Harding never made it home. Private William Harding, a fisherman by trade, fished the shores of Newfoundland in a dory he had made. Now he lies near Beaumont Hamel, never more to roam. Private William Harding never made it home. No, young Billy Harding never made it home. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Beautiful song, Larry.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
War and the threat of war certainly brings people together and communities and countries and nations to fight against a common foe. But oftentimes, people don't agree with their government going to war. We saw during the Vietnam era in the United States tremendous uprisings and demonstrations by people against the fact that their country was involved in the war. So I thought it would be appropriate tonight to perform an anti-war poem. Kendrick Lascelles was a British poet, anti-war activist and pacifist, and most of his work reflected that. And the first time that he performed this poem in public in North America, he performed it on the Smothers Brothers show. Now the Smothers Brothers were a comedy variety show, but they were famous for allowing their guests to speak their mind. And they allowed Kendrick Lascelles to perform this poem. And I don't know if it's connected, but a few months after that, the Smothers Brothers, the most popular variety show of the time, was cancelled. Kendrick Lascelles, The Box. Once upon a time, in the land of Hushabye, round about the wondrous days of yore, they came across a sort of box, bound up with chains and locked with locks, and labeled, kindly, do not touch. It's war. A decree was issued round about, all with a flourish and a shout, and a gaily colored mascot tripping lightly on before. Don't fiddle with that deadly box, or break the chains, or pick the locks, and please, don't ever play about with war. Well, children understood. Children happened to be good, and just as good around the days of yore. They didn't try to pick the locks or break into this deadly box. They didn't try to play about with war. Mommies didn't either. Sisters, aunts, or grannies neither, for they were good and kind and gentle in those wondrous days of yore. Very much the same as now. They aren't the ones to blame somehow for opening up the deadly box of war. But someone did. Someone battered in the lid and spilled the insides out across the floor. A sort of bumpy, bouncy ball made up of guns and flags and all, with tears and sorrow and death that goes with war. And it bounced right out and went bashing all about and bumping into everything in store. And what was sad, most unfair, it didn't really seem to care who it bumped, or what, or why, or for. It bumped the children mainly, and I'll tell you this quite plainly, it bumps them every year and more, and leaves them dead and burnt and dying, thousands of them, sick and crying. For when it bumps, it's really, really sore. There is a way to stop this ball. It isn't very hard at all. All we need is wisdom, and I'm absolutely sure we could get it back into the box and bind the chains and lock the locks. But no one seems to want to help the children anymore. That's the way it all appears, because it's been bouncing round for years and years, in spite of all the wisdom whizzed, since those wondrous days of yore, and the day they came across a box, bound up with chains and locked with locks, and labeled, "Kindly do not touch. It's war." Thank you. Now, I've told Larry a number of times that he's got some of the best war songs that I've heard, and he has another one for us.
The other name on that monument at the cemetery renews, it was John Thomas Berrigan. John Thomas was certainly, he had, there's a lot of relatives still belonging to John Thomas, still around, living in Renews. He's got aunts, he's got great aunts, great nephews, all over the place. John Thomas was joined the Royal Navy after he was in the Naval Reserve here in Newfoundland. When he went across, he joined the Royal Navy and he went sweeping mines. Of course, a very dangerous job. On his second trip over, he was on the minesweeper Gambia, and she struck a mine, and all hands were lost. His body was never recovered. His mother, Mrs. Lizzie, she never accepted the fact that she never got her son's body back. She's sitting in her kitchen window and look out the harbour. They live right next to the harbour. And if she saw something floating out in the harbour, she would go and get her husband or one of her neighbours to go down and check and see if it was him after coming back across the Atlantic. So imagine the life that poor woman lived for the rest of her days. She went to her grave thinking that, right? So I just named the song John Thomas. He took his rubber all clothes, he hung 'em in the shed. He wouldn't need them for a while, he was off to war instead. And the fishing grounds could wait for him, as would the church band too. The war was on his mind right now, he had to see it through. And his father took him by the hand and hugged him one more time. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll be okay. You know I'll be just fine." Then he hugged and kissed his mother, said, "I'll see you in a year." They cried and begged him not to go. They couldn't stop the tears. John Thomas was a fisherman and leader of the band when he signed the card and sailed away from his home in Newfoundland. He took a ship across the sea to England's foreign shores. He joined the British Navy and went fishing there once more. But not for cod or salmon, for herring or for squid. He fished for German mines, you see. That's what John Thomas did. Two years went by, he furloughed back to his home in Newfoundland. to see his mom and dad again, the lads from the church band. He sat around the kitchen singing songs they all well knew, but the war was on his mind again, he hadn't seen it through. And his father took him by the hand and hugged him one more time. Don't worry, Dad, I'll be okay. You know I'll be just fine. Then he hugged and kissed his mother, said, I'll see you in a year. She cried and begged him not to go. They couldn't stop the tears. John Thomas was a fisherman and leader of the band when he signed a card and sailed away from his home in Newfoundland. He took a ship across the sea to England's foreign shores. He joined the British Navy and went fishing mines once more. And he sailed aboard the Gambrie, the minesweeper of the best, up and down the English coast, north, south, east, and west. Then his mother got a letter from the governor. It said, we regret to have to tell you, John Berrigan is dead. Now she couldn't believe their story, she can't believe it's true. Surely they could bring him home to the people that he knew. Now she sits there in her kitchen, not a song to be sung. She looks out through her window, still waiting his return. And she calls out to her husband, can you please go there and see if that's him in the harbor, returning home to me. John Thomas was a fisherman and leader of the band when he signed the card and sailed away from his home in Newfoundland. He took a ship across the sea to England's foreign shores. Now he lies there in the ocean for now and evermore. Yes, he lies there in the ocean of England's foreign shore. Thank you very much. I should have left out my little intro there. John Thomas was the band leader, the church band leader in Renews at the time when he went away. He was a great musician, loved singing, and so that's where that story came from. And I got that from his uncle and his aunts, so. I'm sorry, his nephews and his nieces.
Thank you, Larry. Some great songs there. And now we're going to hear some more great music from the regimental band.
Thanks very much for that. Keep the Home Fires Burning was the first piece. And after that incredible story that we just heard sung that way, and all through that piece, I was thinking about my wife's grandmother. And it's World War II, the box story coming in again. You know, the war never stays in the box. And he left here, and Ruth's uncle left here, joined the Royal Navy, couldn't see well enough, memorized the chart, went like so many other people in the First World War. They lied about their age. We came across a story we were gathering about a chap who was too old and not 20 years off his age, so he could get in to go over and fight. So people were always, in Newfoundland at least, trying to get in and do their part. And he was torpedoed in the Stanley, Ruth's uncle, and her grandmother never got used to it. Every night when she'd go to bed and lock the back door, she'd say, "I'm locking poor Gordon out." And she would go to bed and cry because she was locking her son out that she'd see no more. You just never know, you know, the effects that happen with people. And I'd like to just take this moment to acknowledge that Rhonda Joy is here, Dr. Rhonda Joy, who's Rob Shea's wife, and we're so delighted that you were able to join us for this evening. Absolutely. If he had a last project to work on, this was the one, I tell you. Absolutely, for sure. So the next storyteller is Dr. Terry Bishop Sterling, who's been a prophet mun for more years than I can certainly remember, 40, maybe something like that. So I was at MUN for 42 years, so you've been around as long as I can remember. And she's also been one of the people very much influential in keeping the Newfoundland Historical Society going. She served a term or two, perhaps, as president in the association. Talks all over the place, contributes to Newfoundland Quarterly. There's not much in the history world that she hasn't done, and I'd like you to come forward, if you would please, and share a story with us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to start by standing, but I'm having some back issues this week, so I may end up over there. I want to talk about some of the women who served overseas, Newfoundland Labrador women who served overseas as nurses and VADs. Gary already mentioned one of the VADs. They were exceptional women. I think the most common experience of women during World War I everywhere was worry and grief, and we've certainly heard that. But these women had really interesting stories as well. And it's part of an ongoing research I've been doing. VAD stands for the Voluntary Aid Detachment, an organization founded in Britain to provide nurses' aids in time of war. Initially, they were to relieve trained nurses in civilian hospitals, but by at least 1916, Britain was looking for VADs all over the empire. And these VADs worked in military hospitals in Britain and in France, on the Eastern Front, in Belgium. At least 18 trained Newfoundland nurses, those are nurses who had been through the 3-year training school, as well as at least 46 women who served in the AD, came from Newfoundland during World War I. I've seen numbers up to 200. This number of 18 and 46 were women that left from here. There certainly were Newfoundland women who were trained nurses working in the United States and Canada who had left from there. There were women who were Newfoundland born who were living in Britain at the time who would have joined the VAD. So the numbers were undoubtedly higher. But these are women that I can identify by name who left here during the war. We know a lot more about the VADs. A lot of people have probably read the book, Your Daughter Fanny, which is a collection of letters by Frances or Fanny Cluett, which was edited by Bert Riggs and William Romke quite a few years ago. And I'm working on a collection with a friend of mine, Dr. Heidi Coombs, of letters by another VAD, Sybil Johnson, who was the daughter of a Supreme Court Justice, a St. John's woman, very different woman from Fanny Cluett. We know less about the nurses, and our information is very fragmentary, just little bits and pieces here and there. There's lots of reasons for that, some having to do with their social class and what they ended up doing after the war. A lot of it having to do with the sort of professionalism of nurses who were trained not to, put themselves forward and talk about their own contributions. So I would certainly an ongoing part of my research is trying to dig out more about the actual trained nurses who went. But they all contributed quite a bit. So I'm going to talk mainly on, there's two big collections at Memorial, Fanny Cluett's letters and Sybil Johnson's letters. So Fanny Cluett was from a leading family of merchants, fishermen, and boat builders in Bellorum on the south coast. And at the time of her service, she was a mature, steady woman in her early 30s. She was a teacher. She was her own person. Her father had already died. She and her mother were running their households. Sybil Johnson was the daughter of a Supreme Court judge. She was born in 1887, so was a bit younger. She attended finishing school in England and had studied music in Germany. And some of her letters, she actually wonders about the boys who she had known when she was studying music in Germany and where were they and what was happening to them. When the war broke out, she was engaged to marry a young up-and-coming lawyer named Brian Dunfield. And she supported various charitable causes using her musical training. She and her sister Jill joined the VAD in 1916, and Sybil went on to serve for 19 months at the 1st Western Military Hospital in Liverpool. She was a dutiful daughter and wrote almost daily despite long hours at work. Sometimes she wrote to her mother and her father separately, and over 300 of her letters survive, and they're at Memorial. Undoubtedly, both nurses and VADs included women who were looking for adventure, maybe, or escape from restrictions at home. I have a feeling this was a little bit of a rebellion by Sybil Johnson, for example, her last kind of a little act of her own before leaving her father's house to her husband's house. But most of the evidence shows that these women were driven, like a lot of the men, mainly by patriotism. They saw no reason why they should not be doing their part. Jeanette Coltis, for example, was a VAD who was working as a store clerk in St. John's at the time of the war, and she was discouraged by her mother and her employer from going, but she saw no reason why she should not follow her fiancé overseas to help in whatever way she could. Now, for the graduate nurses, caring for men on the battlefield was at the very foundation of their profession. Mary Southcott, founder and director of the School of Nursing here, certainly saw war work as a noble and appropriate path for her nurses. In May 1915, she read letters from British nurses serving in military hospitals and outlined requirements for those wishing to serve overseas. Southcott trained at least 13 of the 18 nurses who served in the Great War. In a letter recalling her war days, Nurse Bertha Forsey said that she had signed up with encouragement from Miss Southcott. Sybil Johnson also stressed duty as her main motivation. Several times she mentioned that she could not bear to be a slacker. She followed her brother and no less than 15 cousins serving in World War I. She also maintained a sentimental attachment to soldiers and a romantic view of their service, despite what she saw. She was annoyed throughout the war that her fiancé had not enlisted. And this is from one of her letters. "You don't know how I long to hear that Brian is coming over. though I shall be scared stiff, needless to say. But it is no use. A soldier is the only man who counts nowadays among the physically fit. So while a sense of duty and a sentimental patriotism may have been her main reasons, as I said, I think she was also pushing out herself. Neither her father nor her fiance wanted her to join up. They thought she'd do her 6 months, and that would be it. She should come home. But she actually signed up for 2 more terms after that. She wrote from England, though, that I was never really delicate, you know, and it was only ever boredom and laziness which made me slack or run down at home. So she had felt useless and bored. And her time overseas made her feel empowered and useful. Many historians have written about class and professional rivalries between nurses and VADs. It's certainly it was a big thing in Britain, and I've read through the British Journal of Nursing through the war. The nurses in Britain at that time were fighting for professional status. They were trying to get a registry, for example. And then along come these girls who are often from the upper classes, who had 6 weeks Red Cross ambulance training, and all the men were calling them nurses. So that rankled a little bit. But as the war went on, they were very appreciative of those VADs who became more and more nurses' aides as the war went on. Newfoundland nurse Bertha Forsey described the VADs under her as great girls. In my sources, the only VAD who sometimes expressed resentment and used like a little bit of class snobbery against the nurses was Sybil Johnson. Even in this case, however, it was not a consistent complaint. Most of the time, she did the jobs asked of her with no complaint. She really didn't like it if she thought that they were had unreasonable rules that were unnecessary. So she rarely complained that a task was beneath her, but occasionally chafed at what she considered needless rules. She also resented what she considered cold or unfair treatment, tellingly remarking that a servant would not stand for that. And of course, she was a person that had servants at home. After she returned from her last leave in the spring of 1918, Johnson's complaints increased. The new matron forbade music on the wards. Johnson had always enjoyed playing the piano, or her fiddle, as she called it for the men, and thought this rule arbitrary and pointless. To make matters worse, Johnson soon got on the wrong side of one of the ward sisters. She concluded that the reprimands she received were based on class and professional jealousy. She wrote home. The sisters, most of them, like to pretend that VADs are practically servants because most of us are what they would consider grand in their natural sphere of life, and they really are fearfully jealous if any of us play or sing. They think that the officers are something grand and just dread their being nice to us. Matron thinks we have all come nursing with the fixed intention of ensnaring one of these young gods. Such outbursts certainly illustrate class tension, but it is important to note that this reaction was not typical of Johnson's experience. By the spring of 1918, she seems to have reached the end of her rope, and her letters are filled with references to counting the days, reclaiming her independence, and planning her new life with Brian. Neither Coltis nor Cluitt complained about unfair treatment by nurses, but the sources, a nostalgic reminiscence from Coltis, and just 24 letters from Fanny Cluitt. They hard to compare to daily over 300 letters from Sybil Johnson. If we had more letters from Fanny Cluitt, would we find, a nurse that she didn't like or some complaints about treatment? Hospital and military authority was not the only or most difficult adjustment for nurses and VADs. Newfoundland nurses who served overseas with the British forces spent some time in military hospitals in Britain before serving at the front, and this likely provided an important transition. Bertha Forsey spent 2 years at Catterick Military Hospital in Yorkshire before being sent to France. At Catterick, she assisted in the operating room, treated German prisoners of war, and cared for servicemen suffering from shell shock. Her reminiscence is told in a professional, matter-of-fact tone, as all the things I've seen from the professionally trained nurses are, and she clearly took pride in the skills she learned, including training in anesthesia. Similarly, Nurse Maisie Parsons, who served with the Canadian services in Belgium, described the wounds she saw as dreadful but interesting. While nurses were certainly empathetic to their patients, their training helped them to maintain a certain emotional distance. And war work could also bring satisfaction of learning new skills and the reward of being trusted with greater responsibility than they would have achieved as quickly on the home front. I mean, the School of Nursing here only graduated their first graduates less than 10 years before the war started. So these were all fairly new graduates. Even for nurses, however, the steady stream of young, maimed, and dying men must have stretched their professional coping skills. For VADs like Sybil Johnson and Fanny Cluett, who had come to do the domestic work and to soothe the brows of bedridden soldiers, the adjustment to the horrors of war must have been even more difficult. They worked up to 12-hour shifts with a couple of hours off each day. Their experience varied. They wrote letters and shopped for the men. They performed basic housekeeping chores, helped with dressings, and sometimes even assisted at operations. Frances Cluett also mentioned simply, or not so simply, sitting with dying men. Both Cluett and Johnson made particular note of their first time assisting with dressings. This was perhaps the most common VAD nursing task. It was therefore a vote of confidence from supervising sisters and marked the VAD's transition from solely domestic helper to nursing helper. Cluett's introduction to dressing came after only 5 days at a hospital in Britain. Perhaps it was a little too early, as she fainted when she saw the wound revealed. This is the only time she described fainting on duty, but admitted that sometimes she had to turn her head away from the wounds. Johnson was not asked to help with dressings until she had been on duty for 3 months. She described being on the trolley with Sister for the first time and felt she had performed well, but some dressings were harder than others. She recounted helping with a dressing for a man with a fractured spine. The experience prompted feelings of both horror and pride. And you see this a lot in their nurses saying, "It was dreadful, but I was glad I was there to help." She wrote, "The man had sores all down his back, and it was altogether a fearful and repulsive business. I hadn't much to do but hold him steady when I helped roll him over on his side. He was a Scotchman and so game and plucky, and kept talking away to me and held my arm, and his hand was like a firebrand. He had a high temp. In a way, I was glad to help, but it was horrible." Johnson later found it hard to watch as this man died with his wife and young daughter by his side. Apart from the difficult medical tasks, nurses would have been accustomed to performing very personal services for their patients. The young, well-bred women of the VAD would not have been exposed to such tasks, and some found this almost as hard to deal with as the wounds. Ideally, military hospitals in both England and at the front had male orderlies to help move men, to bathe them, to deal with bedpans, and to administer other personal services considered not quite proper for women to undertake. For Johnson, bathing the men and dealing with bedpans were the worst part of the job. While the matter-of-fact Cluett simply mentions giving a bed bath as part of a general description of day's work, Johnson was horrified by the task. Occasionally, all the orderlies would be called up or reassigned, a practice Johnson complained about bitterly. In April 1917, she explained to her mother that since the orderlies were all gone, all sorts of appalling jobs fall on us, and truly, I can't face them. You know my leaning to primness. It's interesting that in a letter to her father on the same day, she doesn't talk about that at all. She talks about the funny antics the men were up to on the wards. So it's kind of interesting that she told her mother the truth and kind of cleaned it up a little bit for her father. Though she claimed to adjust enough to hide her discomfort from the patients, Johnson continued to hate this part of the work. When she learned in June that her ward would be getting an orderly, she announced it in a letter which opened with, "I burst with joy." Living conditions and the work itself was harder closer to the front. Cluett did not have the professional training of Maisie Parsons or Bertha Forsey, so in Rouen, she had to draw on all her personal strength to help her patients and to preserve some peace for herself. On her second day there, she helped with a bad dressing. She wrote, "There was one man wounded in the thigh. There was a hole right through from side to side. It was like you cut it with an axe. You can read about war and the wounded, but when you're brought face to face with it, I tell you, it is heartrending." In Rouen, she also saw the immediate effects of poison gas. Clouet's remarkably candid letters from France lack both the professional distance of the trained nurses and the positive nostalgic notes of VADs who wrote well after the fact. VAD work was not all stress and sadness. Both Johnson and Clouet report on concerts on the wards, and they enjoyed shopping for treats for the men. They relied on family and friends for companionship and waited anxiously for a mail from home. They also drew comfort from their passions: poetry and music for Johnson, and photography, painting, and gardening for Clouet. Clouet painted the scenes around her hospital camp and planted a garden to brighten her surroundings. She even sent home a slip from a rose tree she had planted. This may have been an attempt to preserve some memories of this extraordinary time of her life. Even at their lowest times, Johnson and Clouet were clearly glad that they had come. During the her last few unhappy weeks in Liverpool, Johnson asserted that she never could have forgiven herself if she had shirked her duty and stayed home. For Clouet, the last months of the war only increased the horror around her. In March and April 1918, German bombers struck several hospitals and casualty clearing stations, increasing the load on the rest. Her hospital became, in effect, a clearing station. Patient numbers increased dramatically, and she had to adjust to the severity of wounds as men came straight from the fighting, without even the initial cleaning and treatment she had been used to. She didn't complain about her work, but worried that the staff simply could not keep up, and that the boys were dying, waiting for attention. Despite her distress, Clouet's sense of duty prevailed. This letter closed: "Nothing would induce me to give it up, Mother." After the war, most Newfoundland nurses and VADs, as elsewhere, resumed their lives with little apparent change in their pre-war plans. As in Canada, VADs did not show interest in continuing their nursing experiences for the most part. Johnson married Brian Dunfield as she had planned. They lived in St. John's, where they raised their 3 children. Frances Clouet upgraded her teaching qualifications and returned to assume control of the school in Bellorum. She never married, but helped her widowed brother raise his son. Bertha Forsey married a decorated Newfoundland war veteran and moved to Saskatoon. She retired from nursing to raise her 4 children and became active in community affairs. In 1939, she proudly donned her uniform and was presented to the King and Queen when they visited Saskatoon. 2 of her sons served in World War II. Her daughter Grace followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a nurse, and served overseas in World War II. She recalled that all this was done with her mother's encouragement. But were these women the same wives, teachers, mothers, nurses that they would have been without their wartime experience? The overseas work they undertook likely marked them deeply. As Clouet put it, "This is a wicked world, Mother. You cannot realize what sufferings there are. Some of the misery will ever live in my memory. It seems to me now that I shall always have sad sights in my eyes." This was a common sentiment of women who cared for servicemen in the Great War. But so too was Jeanette Coltis' conclusion that it was the best time of her life. For most of the women mentioned here tonight, World War I was a short, extraordinary interval, but we can only speculate about how their experience overseas shaped their subsequent, more traditional lives. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that. Yes, lots of times we think of the people in the trenches and we don't really think about the people in the hospitals and doing the other support jobs that need to be done, sometimes under very terrible conditions, and thank you for that. Well, these are some of the stories that you're going to hear in this series that's coming your way. And there's a series of podcasts, 30 stories that'll be in several shows. And then there are another 8 or 10 or so that will come to you on Rogers Cable. So for those of you who subscribe to that. And I think we've got just a few minutes of an episode just to give you a sense of what you're going to hear when you come along. So who's pressing the button to make that happen? Oh, oops, sorry. There you go.
Welcome to our Unsung Heroes, World War I stories from Newfoundland and Labrador, a podcast that uncovers some untold tales of World War I that we've gathered during this project from the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm your host, Lisa Gauju. As we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the unveiling of the National War Memorial in St. John's and the repatriation of the remains of the unknown soldier, we invite you to hear stories that have been passed down through generations, stories of courage, sacrifice, and resilience.
Well, my father was number one for the first 500.
Uncle John honed his skills, which served him well later as a sniper in the British Army.
That face turned out to be a gas mask, and the uniform belonged to my only relative who served in World War I.
And he got halfway up. He said, I can't go any further. I'm stepping on dead bodies. People are screaming, they're in pain. And he said, I had to turn back.
From family memories to community legends, these stories bring to life some of the history that shaped our province and our nation.
I said, Phil, can I get you to send all my belongings back to Newfoundland because I'm going to get killed tomorrow?
When the German ship got close enough, the British ship dropped the camouflage that they had, and surprised, there were the guns.
There's a gentleman who we suspect is a German spy, and he's going to be carrying some papers that we do not want to get to the German High Command.
Because what is storytelling, if not an act of remembrance? In this episode, we explore how objects from our past serve as powerful catalysts for memory and storytelling. Whether it's an old uniform, a box of mementos, a medal, or a war memorial, these objects hold echoes of the lives they once touched. They're not just keepsakes, they're connections, sparking memories and helping us carry forward the experiences of those who came before us. This story comes to us from David Hebard and tells how an item of clothing haunted his grandfather's attic.
My name is David Hebard, and I was born and raised in St. John's, Newfoundland. My mother, surnamed Grushy, was from the small fishing community of Pooch Cove, 25 kilometers north of the capital city of St. John's. I have very fond childhood memories of Pooch Cove, of visiting my grandfather in his huge old home that I loved to explore. But there was one part of that house that terrified me. That was the attic, because hung in a dark corner was a ghost-like uniform with a face and bulging eyes. That face turned out to be a gas mask, and the uniform belonged to my only relative who served in World War I. Horatio Grushy was my grandfather's brother. He was a businessman, he was single, and in December of 1915, he enlisted in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. He was 31 years old. On the morning of April 14, 1917, near the small town of Monchay-le-Pieux, France, my great-uncle's life was about to take a drastic change. In a statement of fact, recorded in 1919, my great-uncle would write, "During the attack, my company was reduced to a very small number, and those of us who left were scattered about in small holes. When the Germans broke through on our left, we found ourselves completely surrounded and considerably outnumbered, and so we were reluctantly forced to be taken prisoner." Of his capture, my great-uncle would write, and I quote, "I was sent to Douai, and from there taken before officers, one of whom spoke good English. I was treated very kindly at first, and then they commenced to ask me questions, trying to get information from me concerning our troops. I gave them wrong answers in every case, and when they found out I was not telling them anything, their attitude changed. I was made to stand at attention for long periods of time whilst they continued their examination. And finally, one of the officers got very angry because I refused to impart any information, and he struck me in the face unawares, knocking me down. I was then actually kicked out of the room and kicked into another room and locked, the lights turned off, and left there for 2 days on the floor. Then I was sent to Fort Macdonald, Lille, for about a week. This was really another black hole of Calcutta, and the treatment there was awful. The room was dark, cold, and damp, built out of stone, and we were all herded together in there, nearly 200 of us, NCOs and privates together. The only window had been bricked up a day before we arrived, and only a small hole, about a foot square, was left at the top. We were given a small portion of black bread and a mouthful of salty cold soup. The stench in the room was almost unbearable, as a barrel was kept in the corner for us to use as a latrine. This was emptied every second day with buckets. We had no blankets, no coats, no shoes. We had to lie on the stone floor wherever we could. We drank our small portions of salty soup out of our steel helmets, and the Germans used to congregate outside the small opening so we could hear them, with their rations of beer, and taunt us. After a couple of days, some of our men were almost crazy with thirst and general weakness after the battle. At the end of the week, some of them could hardly stand. Complaints were utterly useless, as they were entirely disregarded. Their argument was that their prisoners were being treated in the same way, and we were being held as prisoners of reprisals. Then we were sorted out in drafts and sent back behind the German lines and under our own shell fire. I was sent to Marquion for about 2.5 months. Except for the food, which was as bad as before, the treatment improved a little, and we were given blankets, a bath, and a bowl to drink out of. I was then shifted to Germany and arrived in Friedrichsville and remained there for 3 months. Here the NCOs and privates were separated, and from this time on, I did not have to do any daily work. My great-uncle would be shuffled around Germany and France a number of times during his incarceration, but he always managed to keep his sanity and keep secret from his captives a private and personal diary that he wrote on ration paper. For more than 100 years, that diary has been in the family. It is now entrusted with me. Horatio Grushey would survive the war, and he would be returned to England in December 1918. Upon his return to Newfoundland, he would marry, have 2 children, and a successful career as manager of a large auto dealership in St. John's. I never got to meet my Uncle Horatio. He died in 1964 when I was just 2 years old. But his war record and personal writings are a vivid, stark reminder of a very dark period in human history.
So, want to hear more stories? You'll have to tune in. And you can do that tomorrow morning. It will go live. The first episode will go live. And then over the next few weeks, we'll be adding additional episodes as they come along. So that's it from me. And I'm going to ask Randy if he's going to come forward and do that. I should say, and I forgot it one point here, that this is going to be available through Spotify, and it's going to be available through the Apple system. And you can go and check on our website, St. John's Storytelling. We'll have the links and stuff up on that. And if you'd like to keep up to date with what's going on, there's a sign-up sheet at the entranceway where you came in. And if you give your email address on that, we'll make sure you get regular updates through our system on that way. So Randy, it's over you to take us home.
Thank you, Gary. And, it's a wonderful podcast. It's a great sound. You'll certainly see the professionalism coming through it when you have a listen. Now, we have a number of thank yous that we wanted to make, and we thought that it was important that we actually make them, not just give a general thank you. The Eric West music and Jim Payne music, you've heard some of it on the podcast, so we thank them for that. Susan O'Cumby and Rebecca Nald, I'd like them to stand up because they were instrumental in getting this project done and getting it done so well. Susan is the project coordinator, and Her organizational skills and her enthusiasm allowed us to get our arms around this massive project. And Rebecca is a talented, up-and-coming young podcaster. You heard Lisa Gushu's voice. Lisa couldn't be here tonight. She's our podcast host. And we acknowledge the support of Arts NL, which this year invested $5.3 million to foster and promote the creation and enjoyment of the arts for the benefits of all Newfoundland and Labrador. And this is extra money. This was the year of the arts, and this is where the pot that our money came out of it and allowed us to do a project that we otherwise couldn't handle financially. Our partners, the Perlin Trust and the Board of Trustees, the Royal Canadian Legion, MUN, and Rogers Cable. We thank them for making us be able to do this. Of course, the storytellers and the people who contributed to the stories, which were almost 100% family members, and we got the stories that they had collected and had in their family archives. And of course, all the story collectors and the hosts that went out to the families and collected those stories. The Legion was instrumental. We would certainly like to thank the Legion and all their members. They gave us any time we needed free space and a place to hold a story circle. The Legion certainly did it. And I would like to acknowledge the Southern Shore Legion and Heather Sullivan for providing us unbelievable support when we went up the shore to gather stories. Thank you, Heather. The steering committee, Gary Green, Dan Warren, Jan Bewley, Rob Shea, the late Rob Shea, and Karen Carroll, for sure, instrumental in keeping this project going, and myself. The Crow's Nest provided us rooms for our meetings, thanks to Gary Green for coordinating that. The CLB, Manager Derek White, the Governor and Commandant of the CLB, Colonel Sheila Mercer, the Regimental Band, thank you very much, and David Mercer, and the Bandmaster, Major Adeline Bethel. Thank you very much. Beautiful facility, beautiful job tonight. The Folk Arts, who helped us with our audio tonight. Rob Brown for the lights and sound. Gracie for live streaming. We got a lot of positive comments on the last project that we live streamed, and I'm sure we'll get it tonight. Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor, for attending our function. Thank you very much. Gary Brown for being our guest speaker and for providing us unbelievable help when we tried to start putting this project together. And anybody else who helped us in any way to put this project together. It was such a massive job that we needed the support of an awful lot of people, and we got it. And we thank the audiences who attended any of the story circles, that we had, and our audience tonight. Thank you very much for taking time out of your lives to come out, and our audience who are watching us live stream, thank you very much. There's tea, coffee, and snacks available after if you want to hang around, and the museum is open. If you want to walk around in there, you can certainly free to do so. So now I'd ask you all to please stand for the Ode to Newfoundland. Thank you very much. And I did forget one person, and this person never ceases to amaze me, Mr. Ken Parsons, the fastest hands in the East. Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much.